Hello kindred longevity lifestyle designers, this is Gavin here with secretsoflongevity.com. We're here today with another health news roundup episode, and I'm going to be talking about three somewhat related stories, related in a bit more of an abstract way, just in something I will elaborate on towards the end of the video. But to start off, there's an interesting finding that has happened through some research that was done on top of another study. It was a study on intelligence, and they were looking at a certain type of virus that was found basically on countertops and other places. And overall they were looking at a wide range of different microorganisms and their effect on humans and especially cognitive function. And it was somewhat understood that these common microorganisms didn't have much effect, but this one apparently does have a marked, although not major, impact on cognitive function. So it doesn't give specifics on how many IQ points this is causing people to drop in, but we can assume it's somewhere in the realm of maybe 5 points. That would be a medium drop, yet still statistically significant. 1 or 2 points could just be error, but when it's, getting up there to 5 or more IQ points as a drop, it starts to actually be noticeable in these cognitive tests. So this is only 90 individuals, a little over 90 people, and about 43% of them had this infection or this change in their genetics or their expression of their cognitive abilities from exposure to this virus, probably for an ongoing period of time. I found this very interesting because it really ties in with the idea that immunity and what effects it has on intelligence, and it's been known for more recently, but quite solidly, that in terms of the research, quite solidly, that the lower your immune system is, the more prone you are to a lower IQ. So high, strong, functioning immunity has a roundabout way of actually affecting IQ and cognitive function and neuroplasticity and all those sorts of things. So this is really useful information because you don't need to do the exact test to know if you have exposure to this. And even though it was just 90 individuals, so if it was 43% of that population, there's no way to know for sure until more research is done how pervasive this is out in the world, and what sorts of things expose you to it and what we can do to counteract it. But just as with all viruses and pathogens, microorganisms, just simply keep and maintain a high immune system boosting element to your lifestyle. So, there's really no need to go into depth on there. You've probably heard me talk about immunity quite a bit in the past, but I'll bring it up again in the near future, especially when we start talking about ways that you can raise IQ through lifestyle means in an upcoming video. And so this information ties in quite nicely with that. Now, the second story, and by the way, you can find the link to the study of the first story in the drop-down menu below. Second story is down there as well. And this one is about sterilization in India, and 11 women dead, 20 in critical condition after a round of 83 surgeries done in 6 hours, which is shocking to think that there's any surgery that can be done that quickly, let alone one that is as invasive as a surgery that's going to make you sterile for women. So it doesn't actually specify if it was all done by one doctor, because that would be absolutely insane in my view, but maybe that's what they were insinuating, because the high speed could have had a greater degree of problems after the effect. But the article goes into some interesting things about India and sterilization and how the government sponsors and gives away free sterilization, even monetary reward for people that come forward to have that done, as they're trying to get their population under control, because they're one of the largest populations in the world. And this starts getting into disturbing territory. On one hand, I think it's great just having that available to people that want to have control of their reproductive abilities, especially in a place that is that poor, because the more children you have, that traps you in poverty. 1.3 billion people in India, that's quite insane. This is built on, pervasive, weird shit going on from the government. But, as recently as the 70s, the Prime Minister at the time, Indira Gandhi, not the Gandhi we would be familiar with. So he had a policy of sterilizing men who had already fathered up to 2 children, or 2 children exactly. So opponents at the time said the program also targeted unmarried and poor men, with doctors given bonuses for operating on low-income patients, since then. And this was actually about vasectomies, because this was on men, whereas the main part of the story is about women. But vasectomies are not as popular now as a result of this history, so the government's now focusing more on women. Eugenics really are not gone from the world, and that's what we have to recognize here. And what are eugenics? What is the morality behind anything that might still be lingering? There's definitely a place for population control when it's voluntary, when there's not coercion to get people to do it, and especially forced. Absolutely not okay. That is clearly an invasion of individual rights. And the way I'm kind of tying all these stories together is to talk about eugenics. Absolutely no evidence that the previous story had anything to do with any kind of conspiratorial element, but that's the kind of thing that makes you kind of wonder about this. We know from things the elite have talked about, and what we see from the effects of wartime medical experiments and things like that. They're looking for things that dumb down the population, that keep people stupid and subservient, so that they're more easily engineered, socially engineered, to do what it is that the people at the top of these hierarchical systems that aren't voluntary to do what they will. So they want that control and power to be able to do and move people about, have them sterilized if they want to. It's all like domesticated animals. You have, a farm, you do different things to different groups of animals depending on what your intentions and goals are with them. So there's nothing that crazy about the story. I'm just linking to this one in particular because it kind of sheds light on a part of the world that is kind of in the past. Like, this stuff was around way back at almost 100 years ago, even going up on 75 years ago in the Western world, in the developed world. But the place that India is at now is kind of where governments and things like that in the Western world were at that time. So the third and final story, which ties in more than either of these first two stories, is this rumor. It's hard to really pinpoint exactly what's happening here, that the tetanus vaccines that have been given out in Kenya, that were analyzed in laboratories in South Africa, tested positive for an HCG antigen. So this is something that causes sterility in the women who happen to be injected with it, and it was women who were targeted. And there's a lot of natural health and alternative news sites covering this right now, up in arms about it, and rightly so. However, the conclusions that are being made are, I think, a bit preemptive. If you do any kind of broad searches, and I always look at the opposing side, because you have to have some perspective. There might be facts that just aren't being addressed by the side that you might have a bias towards. There might be other elements and ideas coming forth there. You can often very clearly see where their bias is. The pseudo-skeptics, I like to call them, tend to malign and use language that dismisses offhand. And in particular, I was looking at the Snopes article on this story, which right at the top is false. There's no evidence, it's just all, opinion based. But they did have one or two good points, which I don't see anyone talking about in the alternative health world, in the alternative news world as well, that there's been stories like this before. Programs in the Philippines, Nicaragua, Tanzania, Mexico have had these sterilization rumors before in very similar circumstances, with just women of childbearing age having been given this, and rumors of there being certain factors within the vaccines that could be causing sterility. However, long term down the road, there was no evidence that there was mass sterilization in these groups that had received all the vaccinations. So, I am by no means writing this off as not having happened. What needs to happen from the South African laboratories is they need to release lot numbers for the vaccines in question. Now, I'm a big proponent of logic and reason and information that's dealt with carefully and with strong standards for evidence. So I think, these sites and news agencies that I tend to have a bias towards are doing disservice when they jump on a story like this and blow it out of proportion before all the evidence is out. Of course, there's always the chance of cover-ups. There's always the chance that as we speak, there could be people being paid off to keep things under wraps. But you always have to go by evidence. If there's evidence of that, then you have to show that. If they successfully bury something like this, then they've successfully buried it. It does no service to the movement that is trying to bring awareness to the legitimate facts around the problems of some of these things in other contexts. It causes more people to be skeptical and dismissive. And when I say skeptical, I mean irrationally so. So when a group or an ideology has, cried wolf, so to speak, they keep harping on the same thing. They might have little bits of truth peppered into their general opinions on things, but if there's a lot of unfounded, irrational, non-evidence-based points they're bringing up, even if at their core they're truth, but if they're presented without the facts, without the references, without the scientific research behind it, then it creates a bad name for the people that take that stance. So I would caution anyone to sharing this information for your own sake or your own legitimacy. I don't share anything on Facebook unless I'm pretty confident in its validity, or any other social media. You probably have noticed I haven't talked about Ebola on my YouTube channel. Well, that's because there was so much non-information being shared about it. I could have done something on how to be more prepared, how to, have antivirals in your system. And I'm just not big on the breaking news type of stories. So that's another factor there too. So yeah, I think the wonderful movement of citizen media and breaking news, on a smaller scale, not these conglomerate corporate news agencies, dinosaur media, is a great thing. We need to have citizen-based media, but people need to elevate themselves to the same caliber of validity and references and scientific thinking, critical thinking, that we see in the medical literature. Because that's how we're going to get a message of being anti-establishment, anti-mainstream, cronyist healthcare that gets shoved down our throats, which results in, something like some of these possible conspiracies I've touched on and possibly suggested as could be occurring from happening. So let me know what you think about this video in the comments below, or your thoughts on any of these stories. Like, favorite, and share the video if you feel so inclined. And with that, I'll talk to you next time. Take care and embrace life without limit.